The shuttle cut through the atmosphere of Veprin X with a low hum, its hull glowing faintly from the heat of descent. Inside, 20 cadets sat in silence, strapped into their chairs, eyes fixed on the fluctuating data screens ahead. Each one came from a different corner of the galaxy. Scales, feathers, fur, skin, and bioluminescence painting the shuttle's interior with an alien tapestry of color and form. Despite the diversity, a common tension bound them: the Rainfall Survival Challenge. It was not merely a test, it was a rite of passage at the Galactic Academy, designed to eliminate the unworthy and crown the adaptable. Among them sat one human girl. Her nameplate read, Cadet Erin Voss. She was quiet, her gaze not on the screens but on the growing shadow beneath the clouds outside. While others reviewed meteorological data and internal blueprints for automated shelter drones, she studied the way the clouds swirled, the color of the treetops, and the terrain's natural slope. Her hands were still, her breathing calm. The alien cadet beside her, a spindly silver-skinned Zelthar named Zurich, scoffed audibly and tilted his head in her direction. "Your species insists on sending primitives," he said, voice nasal and clicking. "Why bother competing when the outcome is already obvious?" She gave no reply. She simply glanced at him, then looked forward again. She knew better than to debate now. Survival didn't start when boots hit the ground. It started in silence, in attention, in what one noticed when others spoke too much. The shuttle touched down with a heavy thud, hissing as its hydraulic landing struts extended. The cadets were released from their restraints, and the rear ramp dropped slowly, revealing the steaming, green-hazed jungle of Veprin X. The humidity hit first, thick and oily, coating every breath. The air was alive with the hum of distant insect life, and occasional animalistic shrieks echoed through the trees. Instructor Kor, a massive armor-plated Yaren with a scarred mandible, stomped down the ramp first. He carried no weapons, just a data tablet in one clawed hand and a narrowed stare that silenced even the boldest. His voice, when he spoke, sounded like gravel falling onto metal. "You know the rules. 3 rotations. Build your shelter from what you find. No off-world structures, no orbit-linked energy feeds, only what you carry in your standard survival belt. Fail, and your cadet status is revoked. Pass, and you join the elite." He paused. "And remember, the rain here is not kind." Erin stepped off the shuttle as the others dispersed in every direction. Each cadet had been given a 3-kilometer zone to work in, and the Academy's orbital satellites would track them from above. The jungle underfoot was rich with moss and decay, leaves as large as blankets and vines that wrapped like serpents around anything solid. The light above flickered, not just from the clouds, but from the slight ionization of the atmosphere. Everything smelled wet, even before the first drop of rain fell. She moved quickly but without panic. Her training wasn't in military protocol or technological mastery. It was in wilderness, in memory, in instinct passed down through her blood. Her mother had once taught her to build mud ovens in the woods of northern Earth. Her grandfather had shown her how to find dry wood under soaked trees. Her people had spent centuries surviving before satellites, drones, and instant field shelters. By the time the alien cadets began deploying their sleek, collapsible domes, unfolding synthetic membranes, or manipulating holographic construction bots, she had already selected her site, a slightly raised patch near a large tree whose roots were partially exposed. The incline meant that water would run away from the spot, not pool into it. The roots offered natural windbreaks. The soil was thick but not too loose. It would hold shape when molded. She dropped to her knees, ran her fingers through the mud, and nodded. Dense clay content, excellent for walling. She removed her pack and opened the survival belt. A thermal blanket, a flint striker, 2 meters of cord, a nutrient pack, a water purifier straw, and a single all-purpose knife. That was all. She wouldn't need more. Other cadets passed nearby as they searched for ideal terrain. She heard laughter from the trio of glowing-skinned Leveran twins, genetically engineered for cold survival, as they watched her gathering wet leaves into a pile. "She's building a nest," one of them said mockingly. "She thinks she's a bird," said another. But she didn't flinch. She dug into the ground with her bare hands, scooping out a shallow, circular depression. She stomped the walls firm, mixing in fibrous plant matter she shredded with her knife to strengthen the clay. Then, using branches she stripped of leaves and bark, she built a ribcage-like frame over the pit, anchoring the ends deep into the mud ring. She wove giant fan-shaped leaves over the top, layered like fish scales, and pressed more mud over them. The interior would be tight, barely enough to curl in, but it would breathe, and more importantly, it would hold. By nightfall, she had sealed the dome with a final plug of damp soil and marked a small opening with a stone. She had even lined the floor with dry leaves and moss to create insulation from the earth below. The shelter wasn't pretty. It didn't glow or respond to voice commands. It didn't project a status indicator or connect to any comm system. But it was quiet. It was strong. It was hers. Up on the ridge, an insectoid cadet activated his shield bubble, which cast a humming blue shell around his platform of flattened bark. It glowed with a satisfying hum that could be seen even through thick tree cover. Erin sat in front of her dome for a moment, watching the sky. The clouds had thickened. The air had stilled. Somewhere in the canopy above, a bird-like creature screeched once and went silent. She listened. There was a pressure in the air, a deep, invisible hand pressing down on the forest, flattening the branches, dulling the sounds. The first test was over. The second would come in the dark, and not everyone would be ready. She crawled into the dome and sealed the opening with a flat stone coated in clay. Inside, it was pitch black and smelled of moss and wet leaves, but it was dry, warm, silent. Outside, a rumble began, faint at first, then stronger. The first drops fell minutes later, thick, oily, and steaming slightly where they struck exposed leaves. She could hear, even from within the dome, the sudden bursts of alarm from distant cadets, cracking sounds, a hiss of something melting, then silence. She smiled slightly. Her test had already begun. Theirs was just starting. Inside the dome, Erin lay curled beneath the leafy ceiling, her back pressed against the insulated floor of moss and dried fibers. The world outside had shifted from gentle rainfall to a violent cacophony. Each raindrop now struck the outer shell of her shelter like a slap from a hot hand. Steam hissed where the acidic moisture met mud, and thick rivulets of water attempted to carve through the structure's curved exterior. But the dome held. She remained motionless for several minutes, her eyes open in the darkness, breathing slow and measured. With every passing moment, she felt more certain that the structure was functioning exactly as it needed to. There were no leaks. The overhead pressure spread evenly across the curved top, and the leaves beneath the mud created a natural membrane, redirecting moisture along the sides. But she could hear the storm attacking everything beyond her small space. Sharp cracks echoed through the jungle. One shelter, judging by the sound, had collapsed under its own weight. Another detonated in a burst of compressed energy, likely a tech dome shorting out. Somewhere not far, a cadet shouted something in a dialect she didn't understand, followed by a choked gasp and silence. The acidic rain wasn't just water. It was alive with compounds foreign to most planetary systems. Erin had read the briefing carefully. The storm systems on Veprin X were charged with a mix of volatile airborne minerals. The precipitation was thick, corrosive, and electrically conductive. That meant energy fields would falter, smart fabrics would melt, metal structures would warp and bleed chemical heat. She had built with none of those things. Hours passed. At times the rain softened, and for a brief moment she could hear insects singing through the wet leaves. But then the storm surged again with renewed fury, and the jungle howled. Still, she remained dry. She slept in short intervals, always alert, listening to the war outside. Her heartbeat never spiked. She had long ago learned the rhythm of survival, action followed by rest, and rest by attention. By morning, the jungle was a graveyard of broken ambition. The light that filtered through the clouds was yellow and angry. Erin pushed aside the clay-sealed stone plug and crawled out slowly, her boots squelching in the now loose mud. Her legs were stiff but warm, her skin untouched by the acidic air. The dome behind her still stood, discolored by the storm but otherwise intact. Around her, the devastation was clear. A quarter-kilometer downslope, a massive dome of synthetic alloy had buckled inward, forming a jagged shell like the crushed carcass of a beetle. The cadet who had built it, a tall, four-armed Vrassian male named Ukor, was sitting nearby on a log, shirtless, burns etched across his upper shoulders. His mandibles clicked in visible pain as he tried to apply gel from a medkit that had clearly seen better days. Erin walked toward him without urgency. As she neared, he lifted his gaze. One of his secondary arms raised instinctively in a defensive gesture, but she simply knelt beside him and opened her belt pouch. She produced a strip of leaf she had rolled earlier for insulation and unwrapped a bit of wild honey she had found under a root. She offered it without a word. He hesitated, then took it. His hands trembled slightly as he tasted it. After a moment, he muttered something in his native dialect, something soft, like surprise. "You stayed dry," he said in accented English. "Yes," she replied calmly. "I burned through 2 domes." "I know." Ukor shook his head, eyes narrowing. "Your kind are strange. You build from dirt and weeds, yet you come out better than those with machines." "I build from what lasts," she said. "You build from what obeys, until it doesn't." He didn't respond. She stood and left him with the remaining honey, walking back uphill to scan the ridge. Further up the slope, she spotted the remains of another shelter, a tangled wreck of scorched vines and melted filament. The 3 Leveran twins were huddled beneath the overhang of a fallen tree, their shimmering skin dimmed and blotchy. One of them had wrapped her lower legs in strips of emergency thermal plastic, but the acid had already done its work. Erin watched as one twin attempted to lift another, only to collapse beside her. She considered approaching, but she knew the limits of what she could offer. Sometimes survival meant understanding when to intervene and when to conserve energy. She turned away and continued her survey. By midday, the sun had begun to force its way through the murky cloud ceiling, revealing more of the jungle's ruined canopy. Leaves hung half-melted, tree trunks scarred and stripped. Several alien cadets emerged from wherever they had taken refuge, all looking exhausted, wet, and angry. Many had burns. A few were limping. Some were entirely without shelter now, exposed to whatever the next storm might bring. Erin passed a crystalline-winged cadet, his translucent wings torn and blistered. He looked at her mud-streaked body and intact clothes with disbelief. "You must have cheated," he hissed. She kept walking. The Academy's observation drones buzzed silently above the treetops, logging every movement, scanning vital signs, mapping heat signatures. Erin knew her readings would be the outlier: steady pulse, normal hydration, 0 external injury. But the instructors wouldn't speak yet, not until the second night. She returned to her dome and reinforced it. The structure had held, but she wanted more insulation before the next storm. She harvested more clay, added a second layer over the ribs, and patched weak spots where water had tried to eat through. She doubled the floor's bedding and placed a layer of bark beneath the moss, adding a thin membrane to prevent ground seepage. Then she foraged. Her movements were methodical. She tracked animal scat for signs of nesting rodents. She listened for changes in insect noise. Where it dropped, there was likely predator movement. She gathered nuts sealed in hard shells and cracked them open with stones. She drank water from thick-stemmed plants she recognized as non-toxic. And she found more honey, this time guarded by small, aggressive flyers. She smoked them out using a burning root ball she ignited with her striker and waved away the smoke with a leafy fan. By evening, her dome was fortified, her belly full, and her muscles loose from a day of motion. The second storm came later than expected. The wind hit first, unlike the night before. Trees bent, branches cracked and crashed to the ground. Aaron heard another dome shatter nearby, the cadet inside screaming for help. No one responded. This test wasn't about rescue. It was about endurance. She crouched in her shelter and waited. Rain slammed the jungle again, but this time she was ready for the increased pressure. Her reinforced shell sagged slightly but held firm. The mud had hardened in the daylight and was now sealed tight. Steam curled through the gaps in the upper vent, the only part left intentionally open, but she had angled it so no water would fall directly in. Her breathing was slow. Her hands rested on her thighs. She closed her eyes and listened to the others lose, not out of cruelty, but because listening was part of the test. The wind screamed through the jungle with a voice sharpened by fury. Branches twisted and snapped overhead, falling like spears into the ground, slicing through foliage and turning the canopy into a battlefield of splintered limbs. The rain followed, heavier than before, not in volume, but in weight, each droplet slamming into the world below like molten stone. The second night had been brutal. This third was something else entirely. It was a purge. Inside her dome, Erin sat cross-legged with her hands resting on her knees. The moss beneath her was damp but intact, the inner air thick with the smell of earth and smoke. She had lit a tiny coil of dried root hours earlier, letting the slow-burning tendril release an oily vapor that deterred the flying insects that had begun to probe the structure. The storm had driven out predators, but it had stirred scavengers. The pressure outside was building. She could feel it in her jaw, behind her eyes, a rolling ache that vibrated deep in her skull. The air itself was changing, thickening, as if the planet exhaled its toxins during these storms. The acidic nature of the rain had intensified. It hissed and spat against the dome's outer shell, trying to burrow through, but the mud held firm, baked harder by layers of effort and instinct. Then came the silence. Not the soft, calming hush of peace. This was a terrifying pause, the kind of stillness that came only before something truly catastrophic. Erin stiffened, her eyes narrowing in the dark. She leaned forward and pressed one ear to the ground, the way her grandfather once taught her. And she heard it, not thunder, not wind, but something massive moving just outside the shelter. A deep, wet drag across the jungle floor, something alive, something displaced. She waited. Minutes passed. No scream followed, no signal flares, just the dull pressure of presence beyond her reach. Then it was gone. When she emerged from the dome at first light, the world no longer resembled a jungle. It looked like a battlefield smothered in ash. The trees were blackened. Large patches of undergrowth had melted into chemical puddles. The air was filled with a sour tang that clung to the back of the throat. Erin pulled a length of bark she had dried and wrapped it around her nose and mouth. It didn't filter perfectly, but it lessened the sting. She moved with caution. The ground beneath her boots squished like pulp, waterlogged and unstable. The mud had turned to slush in lower areas, revealing the bones of trees and shattered remnants of shelters. A cracked shield unit sparked once in the distance, then died, its core burned out. She passed a pile of collapsed polymer panels, all that remained of what had once been a proud Xanthari structure. A cadet crouched nearby, wrapped in shredded thermal foil, eyes hollow, skin burned in patches. He saw her but said nothing. She didn't stop. She moved toward the central ridge, where the orbital drones had dropped the emergency beacon station. While not a rescue point, the station acted as a neutral zone, a small scanner array where cadets could log status reports, update survival metrics, or transmit biometrics to the instructors above. It was also a place of unspoken truth. No one dared lie near the beacon. It recorded everything. As she approached, she saw that several cadets had already gathered. Some sat in silence, nursing wounds. Others argued in low, bitter voices about equipment failure and test unfairness. One cadet, a broad-shouldered Kirelli male, limped up the slope with his arm bound in vine rope, blood seeping through from beneath. His eyes caught hers, and for a moment he paused. "You're the human," he said hoarsely. "Yes," she replied. "You didn't run." "I had no reason to." He looked past her at the forest she had emerged from. "It's gone. My sector is just gone. I know." The Corelli narrowed his eyes. "How are you still walking?" She didn't answer. She stepped past him to the scanner array. A smooth black plate hovered above a steel spike driven into the ground. She placed her hand on the surface and waited. A green pulse scanned her palm, then projected her vitals into the air for a moment. Heart rate, normal. Hydration, stable. Oxygen saturation, optimal. Core temperature, 98.4 degrees Fahrenheit. The numbers hung in front of the others like a verdict. One of the Leveran twins, the only one left standing, hissed something in her own language and turned away. No one spoke after that. Erin walked back to her dome, avoiding eye contact, focusing only on her stride. She passed cadets who had once laughed, once pointed, now silent in their wounds. Every movement she made now was met with a silence heavier than any insult. She had become something they couldn't explain, a contradiction. A species dismissed as fragile and backward had survived without scars. No glowing armor, no reactive structures, just hands, mud, leaves, and patience. As she reached her dome, she paused. Something was wrong. The stone seal at the entrance had shifted slightly. Not enough to collapse the dome, but enough to show disturbance. She crouched low, scanned the ground, and found it. A faint, three-pronged print in the mud. Not human, not cadet. Something else had tried to get in. She peeled the stone aside, slid into the darkness, and scanned the interior. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But there, near the far edge, was a small pile of scavenged food, nuts, moss, a folded leaf with water droplets gathered inside. It hadn't been there when she left. Someone, or something, had left an offering. She didn't touch it. She sat beside it and waited, not for fear, but out of respect. If this planet had more to it than storms and poison, then perhaps the dome was more than a shelter now. Perhaps it was a signal, a symbol, and whatever intelligence had walked past her door had chosen not to attack, but to observe. She stayed inside for the rest of the day, reinforcing the edges, drying new moss for bedding, and watching the vent light fade slowly. As the sun lowered, a low vibration rippled through the soil. Not a storm, but something deeper. Planetary tectonics, the kind that signaled a larger shift in weather systems. She could survive one more night. She knew it. But the others? She wasn't sure. And above, high in the sky, the instructors were watching. They had seen the numbers, and now they would have to decide what came next. The air felt heavier on the fourth morning, as if the planet itself was tired of holding its breath. A reddish tint bled into the clouds above the treetops, and the wind, though weaker than before, moved like something alive, cautious, slow, aware. Erin stepped out of her dome just past dawn, stretching her arms upward until her spine cracked softly. Her body was sore, but not injured. Her feet were calloused and muddy, but her stride remained balanced. The jungle had fallen into a hush, unnaturally quiet after the night's tectonic tremor. The birds hadn't returned. The insects, once omnipresent, were nowhere to be heard. Erin crouched near a half-buried root and pressed her fingers into the earth. It was warm, warmer than before. The vibration had passed, but the memory of it remained in the soil. Something had shifted beneath Veprin X. She pulled a carved stick from her belt, one she had etched with small notches to count the nights, and added a new mark. That made 3. The final cycle had begun. Sometime in the next few hours, the test would end and the extraction craft would descend. But she knew better than to assume it would be simple. The Academy didn't do simple. Erin gathered her gear, which consisted of little more than the flint striker, the bark filter for her mouth, and a tightly bundled satchel of dried seeds, moss, and edible roots. She slung the satchel over her shoulder and began climbing the ridge, avoiding the larger roots, stepping lightly over soft patches of ground. The route she chose curved around the cadet zones and followed the remains of a water runoff channel, now barely a trickle of black sludge. As she neared the crest, she heard distant voices, low, arguing. She crouched behind a collapsed tree and observed. 3 cadets stood near the scanner beacon. Jukor was among them, his burns now partially healed but still visible as a series of flaking red lines across his shoulders. He was speaking to a shorter, wide-chested alien from the Gardak species, a brute of muscle and bone who gestured wildly as he shouted in frustration. Beside them stood the Leveran twin, the only one who had survived the earlier storm. Her luminescent skin had dimmed to a dull purple. All 3 looked ragged, bitter, but unbroken. "She cheated," the Gardak's cadet barked. "No one survives without aid." "She had help. She must have—" "She didn't," Jukor said flatly. "She did," the Leveran snapped. "No species can last like this alone. My shelter cost 15,000 credits. It lasted 2 nights. And hers cost nothing," Jukor replied, crossing his arms. "That's the point." Erin remained hidden, watching the conversation unfold like a crack spreading in glass. This wasn't about her dome anymore. It was about something else, something deeper. Pride, ego, collapse. The Gardak's cadet stepped closer to Jukor. "You're defending her? I'm stating facts. She's a threat. She's a reminder." The Leveran narrowed her eyes. "Reminders burn." Erin turned away. She had heard enough. She moved silently back down the slope, disappearing into the vines. If the others were unraveling, then the final phase was already in motion. Back at her dome, she dug a shallow hole with her hands and buried the remaining food offerings that had appeared again overnight, this time larger, more deliberate. Something intelligent had left them. The arrangement was too precise. She didn't want to draw attention. Whatever had taken interest in her shelter, it had not been hostile. But she knew the moment the drones recorded it, the Academy would investigate. So she covered the evidence. Midday came with a sudden brightness. The clouds thinned, and sunlight stabbed through the canopy, painting harsh shadows on the ground. It was the first time Erin had seen unfiltered light in days. She stood in it for several minutes, letting the warmth soak into her skin. Around her the jungle steamed, not with decay, but with renewal. The plants, though battered, began to uncurl. The trees dripped but stood firm. Nature had endured. A high-pitched hum broke the silence. Erin looked up. Above the tree line, the retrieval craft descended like a silver arrow. No sound but the ripple of displaced air as its landing gear unfolded. The shuttle didn't touch the ground. It hovered just a few feet above, its side panel sliding open. A bright blue light pulsed from within. One by one, cadets emerged from the tree line, walking slowly, some limping, others carried. The injured were pulled into the craft first. Medbots hovered at the door, scanning each body before entry. She waited. She didn't rush toward the craft. She stood by her dome, watching, her eyes scanning the sky. After the others had boarded, Instructor Kor descended from the ship. His massive Yaren frame landed with a tremor. The instructor didn't speak. He turned his heavy head toward her, mandibles clicking once. Then he walked the short distance between them and stopped in front of her dome. He crouched slowly, pressing one claw against the mud wall. He pushed lightly. It held. He stood up. "You stayed here?" "Yes." "No assistance?" "No." He turned and looked into the jungle, then back at her. "Do you know how many passed?" "No." 6 out of 20. 2 with critical injury, 3 with broken equipment, 1 with nothing but hands. She didn't answer. He looked down at her again. "This wasn't a test of knowledge." It was a test of silence. I know. The jungle wanted obedience. You gave it none. You listened instead. I always do. He nodded once. Leave the dome. She hesitated. Why? It will remain here. For future cadets to find. A memorial. Or a warning. She stepped away, not looking back. The shuttle lifted her in a stream of air and heat, and the jungle fell behind. Through the open hatch, she watched as the muddy dome grew smaller. Alone in the clearing, unmoving. It had no lights, no beacon, no signal. But it had survived, just like her. And soon, the rest of the galaxy would learn that survival didn't always shine. Sometimes it was made of mud, breath, and quiet hands. The hum of the shuttle's stabilizers softened as the vessel broke through Veprin X's upper atmosphere. Inside, the survivors sat in silence. There were no cheers, no conversations, only the gentle hiss of medical bots tending to burns, sprains, and exhaustion. The seats weren't assigned, but Aaron had taken one near the observation port, not to watch the stars, but to keep her back to the others. She didn't need to see their faces to know how they looked at her now. Above her, the dome's mud still stained her collar. Her nails were dark with clay. Her boots were dry, but cracked at the soles. No amount of sterilized air could remove the scent of leaves and ash from her skin. She hadn't asked for a medbot, and none had insisted. The bruises on her knees were a quiet victory she wanted to keep. Instructor Kor stood at the front of the cabin, silent until the doors sealed and the stars wrapped around them in the slipstream jump. Assessment complete, he said finally, his voice heavy, low. Your data has been uploaded to the Academy Core. Your performance will be reviewed by the Galactic Survival Council and archived in the permanent record. His gaze swept across the cabin, resting briefly on each cadet before returning to Aaron. Out of 20 cadets, he continued, only one met every objective without external support, technological failure, or medical intervention. This individual displayed not only resilience, but creative adaptation to planetary hostility. She did not seek dominance over the environment. She made peace with it. And in doing so, she endured. Several heads turned in her direction. She didn't move. She didn't look at them. Cadet Aaron Voss, he said, louder now. Stand. She stood. Her legs were steady, though the muscles twitched from the effort of rest after too much action. She kept her chin level, hands behind her back, eyes focused ahead. You are now classified as Tier 1 Survivalist. Effective immediately, you will be granted full access to the Elite Division training archives and field operations. She nodded once. Kor's mandibles shifted slightly. Do you wish to address your peers? No, she answered. Silence again. But this time it was charged. The others were not ready to accept her. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. And she didn't care. When the shuttle docked at the Academy's orbital platform, the survivors were separated. The wounded were led to recovery pods. Others were escorted to briefing chambers to deconstruct their performance with instructors. But Aaron was taken down a different corridor, this one unmarked, its walls etched not with glowing lights or decorative panels, but scars, literal cuts in the metal, places where something had clawed its history into the Academy itself. Her escort was not Kor, but a humanoid female in black robes with no rank insignia. This way, the woman said simply. They entered a circular room. The walls were glass. Beyond them was void, the blue curve of Veprin X below, the dark weight of space above. In the center of the room stood a low table, covered in images, maps, old tools, and artifacts. Everything was physical. No holograms, no interfaces. Aaron approached without asking. The woman stood beside her in silence for a moment, then spoke. Do you know why you're here? To be debriefed, she said. No, the woman replied. You're here because the others failed to see what you saw. And because we need to understand why Aaron looked at the items on the table. Some were primitive, stone blades, burned cloth, coiled vines. Others were alien in origin, clearly from species she hadn't yet studied. All of them were tools of survival, not weapons, not machines. Hands had shaped them. She understood that instantly. Survival, the woman said, is not about resistance. It's about reading the world without needing it to change. It's about recognizing what wants to kill you, not because it hates you, but because it is indifferent. Aaron remained silent. The woman gestured toward a segment of charred ceramic. That was recovered from a crash site on Nix 7. A crew of 15 died. Only one survived. Human. She built a signal beacon out of her oxygen tank and a broken food dispenser. Do you know what the others tried to do? Activate a distress call? The woman nodded, which drained power and collapsed the battery core within hours. She survived 21 days. With scraps, Aaron looked at her now. Is that what you wanted to see in this test? No, the woman said. It's what you showed us anyway. A long pause followed. Then the woman pulled something from her belt, a small chip, no larger than a fingernail. This contains your clearance. Use it when you're ready. It will unlock operations beyond the standard cadet path. No more instructors, no more simulations. You'll be assigned to planetary response. Aaron took it, but didn't pocket it yet. I'm not interested in reward, she said. Good, the woman replied. This isn't one. Later that day, back on the surface of the main station, Aaron entered the Academy Commons. It was bustling, cadets moving between halls, instructors reviewing combat drills, technicians adjusting exosuits and weaponry. But as she passed, silence followed her. Not overt, just subtle shifts, heads turning, conversations lowering, glances held too long. She found an empty bench at the far edge of the observation dome, where Earth's moon cast faint light over the platform's upper atmosphere. She sat down, alone, and pulled the chip from her pocket. It shimmered faintly in the light. Not gold, not silver, just dull gray, like stone, like mud. A few minutes later, Jukor approached. He stood beside the bench but didn't sit. They're afraid of you, he said. She didn't reply. They think you had help. I didn't. I know. She turned her head now. Why did you defend me? Because I saw what you built, he said, and because I tried to copy it. I failed. Mine collapsed. Yours stood because I listened to the dirt, she said softly. He smiled, or the closest thing his mandibles could express. I didn't know mud could teach. Only when it rains. He left without another word. As night fell over the orbital platform, Aaron remained on the bench, still holding the chip. Above her, stars blinked with disinterest. Below her, Veprin X turned slowly, its surface scarred by storm paths and jungle canyons. No one would rebuild the dome she left behind. But it didn't need rebuilding. It had already done its job. And now, it lived, not in ruins or memory, but in fear. Quiet, unspoken fear. That the most dangerous cadet in the academy hadn't come from fire, steel, or plasma, but from silence, clay, and patience. And she was only just getting started.